So today's episode, the topic is going to focus around how to land meetings with busy executives. So those senior vice presidents, folks in the C-suite, those emails that you're sending, the phone calls that you're making, the LinkedIn messages, maybe the in real life, the IRL visits that you're doing. How do we grab their attention? So we're going to talk about three kind of core areas of this. One, we do have a couple of senior leaders on the call today, and we're going to get their firsthand perspective of what it's like to be on the receiving end of that outreach. So maybe the mental spam filter that they might use, if you will. We're going to talk about common mistakes, and then we're going to talk about tactics and strategies. Our goal is to spend at least half of this time giving you guys really tangible things that you can do to engage executives. So a couple quick things before we dig in. Will the call be recorded? Yes, it's going to be recorded. We'll send it out afterwards. If you have a question, feel free to either drop it into the chat. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of this as well. The Q&A button is going to help us kind of separate your question from the noise, and we want to make this as interactive as possible. Second thing, want to thank our two awesome sponsors, ZoomInfo and Orem. If you're not using ZoomInfo, what are you doing? And they do a lot more than sell contact data these days. Steven, we'll let you give a pitch later if you want. But I think one of the coolest things about ZoomInfo is how ahead they are in the AI game. And it's not just like editing emails that don't look that great. It's like, how do we actually help the rep be more productive and prioritize their time and remove a lot of the thinking that it takes so that you can actually just spend that time selling and having conversations. They're doing it the best out of all of the folks that I see out there. And then Orem, if you're not using something like Orem, a dialing tool, a virtual sales floor tool, this is just one of the best solutions out there to, like, if you literally want to 3 to 5x your output over the phone overnight, that's the way to do it. So go check out those two tools. Our guest today, we got Steven, SVP of Sales over at ZoomInfo. We got Laura, LG, VP of Regional Sales over at Varicent, and Kyle Nelson on her team, Regional Sales Manager at Varicent. And if you're coming across Outbound Squad's stuff for the first time, my name's Jason Bay. We run a sales training shop. So we work with companies and help them with their outbound and selling efforts. All right, you guys, ready to dig in?
Do it.
Let's do it. Okay, so Steven, I want to kick the first question your way. If you could, just give us a perspective of, I want to know how many emails a guy like you gets on a weekly basis from people trying to sell you shit. What does Steven's inbox look like right now?
Yeah, my inbox is busy. I'll put it that way. So I do get I get a lot of emails in a week. It'd be tough to quantify. It's probably pitches. It's probably 50 to 100 a day.
My
If I
goodness.
had to probably put a number around it. And then there's a whole bunch of cold outreach and LinkedIn in-mails as well,
Hmm.
which, sorry, spoiler alert, I don't answer any of those, really. I just,
You accepted my LinkedIn connection request.
I accept connection, like connections I will, but the cold pitch,
Yeah.
it's a super low response rate for me. I see it
Yeah.
across my team as well. And then to be honest with you, like what has dropped off that surprises me in the years that I've been doing this, what has slowed down in terms of outreach is like I get far fewer phone calls than I used to. Which as a sales leader that runs a heavy outbound team is very disappointing to me.
Yeah.
But like the only people I talk to that are trying to sell me something is through the phone. And so that is far and away like for me, and I know I'm unique because I'm in sales, and so I'm selling to people,
Mhm.
and so I'm a little more apt to pick up the phone. But yeah, inbox is a mess. Phone is pretty light. In-mail busy, but a low return rate for me personally.
If you had to think about your own internal decision-making criteria for like not only what grabs your attention, but what is likely to spur some sort of action, like you forwarding an email off to maybe someone that reports to you to say, hey, go check that out, or maybe you shooting a text someone's way because you got a voicemail that was really interesting. What is your own mental sort of decision-making criteria or filter that's like, this is something I would actually spend time on versus this is something I would completely ignore?
Yeah, there's a timing component. Timing is everything in sales.
Yeah.
That's a big one. You talked about like ZoomInfo and what we're doing. That's a big area that RAI like really helps sellers.
Mhm.
Relevance, though, is like far more important. I want to know what you're talking to my peers about. Right? Like you as a seller you probably get to talk, if you're selling to VPs of sales or CROs, you're probably having more of those conversations than I am within my own network, because you're talking to them every single day. So I want to know like what's top of mind for them. What am I not thinking about? And then, relevance to my business, tangible ROI, but it's got to be like short and sweet. If it's a long, blocky text, email, right, hard for me to filter through, it's going to get marked as read and deleted right away. It's got to grab me right from the start.
Yeah. So something that's relevant to peers specifically, and I think there's an interesting insight there that I think is not so obvious. Like if I'm a rep, oftentimes what I might do is drop logos of companies in there that like, yeah, they're great logos, but if someone reached out to me and said we work with Amazon, I'm like, dude, we're a business of like 5 people. We're
Yep.
a sales training shop. Like we do consulting. Like that's a completely different, business. So I think the relevant social proof big there. And then what I sort of indirectly heard you say is this relevant to one of our key initiatives, which you being a publicly traded company, it's not the hardest thing in the world to figure out what ZoomInfo is up to and what you guys care about.
Yeah. Yeah, like
Yeah.
the best, most recent example of that. So the seller did a great job. And I didn't answer the phone right away because I was busy, but like he left a voicemail, which if you talk about sort of like things declining, phone calls have been declining. Voicemails are like non-existent. My phone will ring throughout the day. Very few leave a voicemail, which is crazy to me. I see Kyle shaking his head like, is that for real? Because
Yeah.
I don't know if you ever called me if you don't leave the voicemail, but he left a great voicemail and it started out like, hey, Steven, you can blame ZoomInfo for my call. And so right off the bat was like, oh, that's interesting. He used the product. He's got hopefully a good
Yeah.
insight for me. And then he referenced like an initiative that was talked about in our Q2 earnings call, and was, said, hey, I was wondering if that's also like top of mind for you and your department. Because if so, here's what we're doing, and here's how we've been helping, blah, blah, blah. Again, I didn't answer the phone, but he left a voicemail and he got a call back, because it was relevant. It wasn't top of mind for my department, wasn't a big initiative, but I'm in sales and good sales karma. So I called the guy back and great pitch. And I use that voicemail as an example across my team.
Yeah. I think there's something to be said about voicemails as too, which we're going to dig into everyone watching like the channel aspect of this and what channels are working. LG, I wanted to ask you, because you've been in the game for a while as well, how have you seen this type of outreach like adapt
Yeah.
in your roles over the years in terms of the approach, how to get people's attention, et cetera? And then I want to start getting into some tactics and things like that for the group here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's interesting. A fun stat for everyone to keep in mind as they are prospecting is that in 2018, there was roughly 280 billion emails sent globally. And it's expected that by 2027, there will be roughly 408 billion emails, which is roughly a 45% increase over 10 years, right? So when you listen to what Steven just shared, I also get a lot of spray and pray. It is much, much harder to reach folks by email, especially if the email is not hyper personalized. So I remember back in 2016, 2017, I think this is probably like at the height of sort of sales engagement platforms really starting to proliferate and, become the norm. I was in a player coach role at the time, putting probably 20 to 30 people in a sequence per day, booking with extremely high conversion rates, not personalizing at all. And I think this is what many of us probably were experiencing at the time, right?
Yep.
And so again, I think all of that clutter, all of that noise, it's interesting because LinkedIn actually did a study in 2021 that found that top performers who focused on doing fewer things, but doing them exceptionally well, right, are the ones that are winning, right? And so I'll just piggyback off of Steven's other point, which is like, I can't remember the last time We all hear omni-channel, right? Which is this concept of leveraging LinkedIn, calls, emails, voicemails, gifting, reaching people through all sorts of different channels. I can't remember the last time that someone reached out to me. I've gotten calls, one call, maybe two. I've gotten 1 or 2 emails. Can't tell you the last time I got an email, a phone call, and a LinkedIn message that was personalized and relevant to some of the initiatives that I'm focused on. So that's where, again, I think what's happening still in the sales ecosystem is this concept of activity, 10 or 20 people in a sequence per day, generalized messaging, and there's just not enough steps in those sequences. So again, going back to, right, focus on, again, just depending on what segments you're focusing on, whether it's 3, 5, or 10 people in sequence per day. This wasn't planned, by the way, but we are also very happy customers of ZoomInfo. We use a lot of those capabilities that are a really integral part of our prospecting strategy and personalization strategy. But those are just some of the high level trends that I've been seeing.
Love it. So, Kyle, I want to kind of open a topic up with you three and just with the audience here and just kind of get to the provocative stuff. Because I think that, so being in my seat, I work with a lot of different types of companies. Most of them don't sell to salespeople. So I get to see how people sell to CIOs. I get to see how they sell to CISOs, how they sell to e-com roles, IT people, and sort of everywhere in between. And I would say that there is this thinking that maybe not cold calling is dead, because you see that a lot on LinkedIn, but that the phone just doesn't work on executives. No executive would ever pick up the phone. And we talked about voicemails. And I mean, there's a lot of great data out there that supports that email reply rates will literally double if you use voicemail strategically and like point people to voicemails. There's a lot of data. Orem has a bunch of data, millions of outbound calls where they looked at when reps left voicemails, the subsequent pickup rate was 25% higher the second, third, fourth, fifth time you call someone, right? So there's this idea, again, I think that, well, the phone is just not very effective because people don't pick it up. And Kyle, what's your firsthand experience? Like if we talk about something here, a lot of people are wondering is like Steven, you just said the phone, like really, like does the phone really work with these busy executives? Like Kyle, what's your firsthand experience doing that? Because you're doing this probably the most out of the 4 of us on a daily basis.
It does work. And I think some of this younger generation, maybe they're scared of calling. I think we're more comfortable texting, right? That's kind of where this younger generation's come. Do not be afraid to make phone calls. Making phone calls is really key. If they don't answer, which is probably 90% of the time, that's okay. But leave a voicemail that references an email or a message you just sent. I like to keep it short and sweet. Hey, Steven, thanks for taking my call. Just want to leave you a quick note. I sent you an email on November 11th with the subject line this. Could you open that up, review it? Let me know if this resonates with you or not. No need to call me back. I've gotten so many people to open emails and actually message me back on that. I thought it was interesting. Steven brought up that he got a voicemail, and it sounds like the salesperson gave a pitch in the voicemail. I don't know if I would necessarily do that because you want to be short and sweet. And unless you really have your pitch down and you can be relevant, don't ramble. Because after about 10 seconds of rambling, I'm hanging up. I don't care. I get people that call me all the time also. Unless you can have impact within the first 10 to 15 seconds, I'm not listening anymore. And that's why I like to reference an email that I sent that probably has more relevance, something that is tangible to that individual that will resonate with them. But if you're not making phone calls, you're not going to be building pipeline.
Yeah. So I think there's something else. I don't know about you guys, but I'm just looking at my phone. 100% open rate on voicemails. I don't listen to the entire voicemail, but I'm at least going to click it to make sure it's not someone that I should be getting back to. Voicemails have on average a 90+% open rate. And again, most people are looking at a transcript, but tell me where else you're going to get a 90% opportunity that someone at least attempts to like listen or look at what you said. That ain't happening via email, and people aren't picking up 90% of the calls that you send. They certainly aren't accepting 90% of the connection requests that you send. Let's get like pretty tactical with the phone piece. And I'll just kind of open this up to you three. If you three picked up a cold call and said hello, what needs to come out? And we can talk techniques and like all of that kind of stuff. I'm just interested in your personal perspectives. What needs to come out in the first like 15 or 20 seconds for you to know that, okay, I may not have time to talk and like really get into it, but I'm at least willing to hear this person. What are some of the things for you guys that just like need to happen in those first 20, 30 seconds?
For me, again, it's going to be like anecdote. One of the things that I was taught my team was like to go for a quick yes. Like if you can get a yes out of me, like something you probably know I'm dealing with. Because if I can get the first yes, it makes the next yes and the next yes like far easier versus a no right out of the gates where I'm probably already a little bit defensive. I think again, it's usually something I've heard or like you've heard and had a conversation with. So, hey, Jason, was just talking with another SVP of Sales about blah blah blah, and was super timely and top of mind for that individual, and thought it might be the case for you. Have you thought about that recently? Right, like it's pretty innocuous. It's not a pitch. It's not like here's what my product does. And more often than not, if you've done your homework, you're probably going to get that, or like about my role, what I'm struggling with, what your product sort of solves. You should be able to have that like anytime I ask my key persona this question, 90% of the time I'm going to get a yes. And so then if I can get that yes, then from there, like it's not like maybe a full-blown pitch. It's like, hey, is that something that you'd be, personally focused on, or is there somebody on your team that's better to go after and talk to about that? Maybe Matt, again, if you've done your homework, that Matt was a direct report to me. And so it gives me like an easy out. Hey, it is top of mind. I am actually responsible for it, or I'm not, but here's a person that you should go talk to first before it's going to come to me anyways.
Yeah. So you guys talk, I've had so many ZoomInfo folks on these lives, and you guys are really big on customer voice, which is like I was speaking with another person like you that shared this thing. And then the idea is that thing is like so specific. If I was to give another example of what that thing might sound like for a CISO, like one of my clients, they help with not the IT part of security, the computers and the networks, the OT, so the environment inside of the factory. And what that might sound like is, I was speaking with a CISO the other day at XYZ company, and they were really worried about the level of visibility that they have inside of their factories and how easy it was for people to connect wireless devices for those. And I'm curious, is that top of mind for you? When you can get like really specific with the language, it helps a ton. And the thing that I would say is it's this idea that you're not selling the product in that first 30 seconds. You're really selling yourself and your credibility by doing that. You're showing that exec that you're someone that they should be talking to and that you speak and interact with people like them. LG,
I would just
go ahead, LG.
I would add on to that. Today, it's so much easier to do research and become familiar with the individual and their company, especially with ZoomInfo. You go on ZoomInfo, you go to their account ID, and you spend 15 minutes asking questions. What's relevant to them right now? What was in their last earnings call? What are they seeing? Ask these different prompts and learn as much as you can. And again, it doesn't take a full day to do that. And that way you're well prepared. So when someone does answer that phone or someone responds to an email, you're able to have a relevant conversation. And if you are a salesperson, maybe not a BDR or SDR, but a salesperson where you're leading demos and discovery calls on a daily basis, use what you're hearing from other individuals in that conversation. Hey, Steven, actually, that's really relevant. I was just speaking to the SVP of Sales at so-and-so, and they're seeing this and that. Are you seeing the same thing, or am I way off here? Be able to use those stories, gather what you're talking about every day, and use it in your messaging.
Yep. Yeah. That's such a good thing to tag. As an account executive, I find too, it's like, how can you create momentum from every sales conversation or every deal that you close? Where it's like all of the stuff that was going inside of that account or during that sales cycle, it's literally the same types of things that you can take into another conversation. Let's just ignore the person in the chat, you guys. We could maybe kick him out later. So appreciate you guys dealing with the weirdo in the chat here. Laura, LG, you were going to say something though.
Yes. So a couple of things as it relates to the cold call. Number one, I would say, this is an anecdote, I don't have data on this, but like 95% of people who have cold called me or others do not sound confident. Like the tonality of your opener is so incredibly important, right? And it's probably because we're so used to people not picking up that when someone picks up, you can tell most folks sound a little bit shaky. So that's the first thing to be really mindful of. And you've got to practice, right? The same way that pros, right? Like they're practicing free throws, they're practicing their golf shots, even though they're an expert, like before you go on a call blitz, you've got to practice what you're going to say to warm yourself up and get yourself hyped up. The second thing is, a permission-based opener, right? Can I have, 27 seconds of your time? It just shows a bit of humility, asking for permission. And then again, from there, there's going to be two approaches that you can take. The first is, again, sort of a persona-based approach, which is really like, hey, LG, most VPs of sales that we're talking to every day are focused on how to leverage AI across their sales process. They're focused on on AE generated pipeline, as well as, how to effectively multi-thread in complex deals. Out of curiosity, which of those resonate the most with you? The problem with most openers that I get is they're so generic. They're so like those where you can see, I said AE generated pipeline versus just generating pipeline. Of course, every leader is focused on generating pipeline, but there's also 1,500 tools out there that claim that they help you 10x pipeline. So that's really the key, is demonstrating confidence, being really specific about the problems that you solve. So that's one approach if you don't have any insight into sort of some of the nuances of the company. Secondly, it's what Steven mentioned, right? If someone calls me and says, hey, LG, I spoke to a few folks on your team, here's what I heard, right? That is absolutely critical. Now you've got my attention. Right? And the last thing that I'll mention as it relates to prospecting into the enterprise, right? One of the biggest mistakes that I see, and this is one of the things we're working on, with my team right now, is a lot of times folks will prospect 2 or 3 people, 2 or 3 contacts at a specific company, right? So that's one mistake. Or they'll prospect 20 contacts with the exact same messaging, right? Copy, paste, message from the first sequence that's personalized and send it to 20 people, right? So one of the things that I'm doing with my team now is we're sitting down, we're looking at people's profile. Are they, head of analytics? Are they VP of sales? Are they operations? Are they an admin? And slightly tweaking the messaging based on that persona and ensuring that, that the messaging is relevant to that specific persona. So, those are some of the biggest things that came to mind for me, which again, emphasize what Steven mentioned around number one, what are other VPs of sales focused on? Be specific. Do not throw out like industry jargon, right? Or what are other people on my team saying, right? Even if you've just talked to one person at that company that you can reference, that will help garner the attention.
Let's talk about that technique, because let me know if you 3 disagree. If you're trying to get a hold of an executive at any company with 1,000 or more employees, you're probably not going to just send a cold email to an exec and have them agree to spend time with you. It's probably not going to happen. If you don't come into that conversation with some sort of insight and some sort of conversation that you've had with someone on your team, it's going to be very, very hard to make that messaging specific enough. What it's going to be missing is like a project name or an initiative name or some sort of like internal language around how they talk about the problem. It's really hard to get, even with a quarterly report or a transcript or a 10K. It's going to be hard to get a lot of that stuff. So let's talk about it's good old fashioned groundswelling, really is what it is. Like, before I reach out to Steven, let me talk to a couple people on his team. Kyle, kick this question your way first. How do you think about that groundswell motion? And maybe even give context for people that maybe aren't doing that, why that works, and more importantly, what are you trying to accomplish through those conversations that you then kind of bubble up to the exec?
You're gathering. Yeah, you're gathering. You're gathering nuggets, and those nuggets are so important to understand what's going on at the company in that department. What are their initiatives? Those people on their lower level are more likely to answer and respond to you versus a VP or a C level. And they're going to give you nuggets that you can use in your messaging when you do get to what I like to refer to the final boss. Maybe the final boss is this chief revenue officer, right? Hey, I spoke with this admin, or I spoke with this analysis, or this person that's doing this. They shared that you're still on this vendor, you have 12 months left, and these are the pains that they're feeling. Is this what you're seeing? How does this tie to your initiatives for next year? Gathering that information and talking to those lower level individuals is so key to your success and your preparation for when you do get to the final boss. That's going to make sure that you've done all of your research, everything. And you're right, you're not going to gather everything through the 10K. You're not going to gather everything off account AI. You need to go and knock on doors of the common people, the people that are actually in the weeds, that feel the pain. And then you're going to use that information to craft a message that will resonate with that VP or that executive. And they'll be like, hey, you know what? You're right. This is something that we need to talk about.
Yeah, I always say that because I'm working with a team right now, an enterprise team on account planning. And it's like the gold for your account plan is not like in the computer. Okay. The gold for your account plan comes from the conversations that you have with people that you can then like tailor and like validate some of that information with. Another thing with the Groundswell is like just stakeholder mapping. And when you start to get into like these complex enterprise companies, it's really hard to tell who the right people are even to talk to. They might have like 100 VPs of sales, you know, and like the nomenclature that they use around the roles and the responsibility is different across, you know, companies as well. So we have that groundswell kind of piece. I think this leads into, and we're kind of going out of order, everyone, a little bit. We talked about the phone call a little bit. I wanted to give context prior to the caller and how to like really set up and make sure you nail that call or that email to the exec. There's the groundswell piece. And I think what this is helping you formulate at the end of the day is some sort of hypothesis or point of view on what you think the problem might be, why change, why now, and then why they should talk to you about it, right? How do y'all think about, I'll just open the question up to you three. How do y'all think about the hypothesis piece of the equation? Because I know there's tools that help with account planning, and ZoomInfo helps gather a lot of these insights, but unless there's something I'm not seeing out there, it's still up to a rep to really be like, okay, what is like my 4-sentence like hypothesis on why the conversation makes sense, you know, right now? Any insight on that piece of the equation and how to really formulate a good hypothesis?
Our approach that's been really effective is really 2 steps when you think about an email. What comes first is the observation, right? And this is where you, as the subject matter expert who talks to CISOs, CMOs, CROs every day at your company, take what you're observing, right? So, hey, we talk to a lot of CROs every day who are struggling with ABC. I'm noticing, I've observed blank in your space, in your industry. Then comes the hypothesis, right? Wondering if you're bumping into this. Am I off base to conclude that, you know, this is impacting pipeline revenue, et cetera, right? Yeah. So that's how you keep it short and sweet. And the observation is where you can, again, take the account planning, the research, what you see online on their website, et cetera, where you can personalize it a bit, right? Or I'm sorry, you can make it relevant, right? And then you come up with the hypothesis. And then at the very end is where the personalization, if you put PS go Buffs to me in an email, it's very high likelihood that I will respond as an avid Buffs fan. But I'm not going to take the meeting just because you say, hey, LG, Deion Sanders is awesome. I'm going to say, yes, I agree. I'm not. So that observation and then hypothesis and then a PS, you know, I also love dogs or whatever it is that you notice about them personally. That to me is sort of the ideal personalized and relevant email. That's where you can form that hypothesis in an effective way.
Well, and I think what's key about that, LG, is that you're not even pitching. You're not even promoting what your solution or your company does. You're
Yeah.
leading there and you just want to have an honest conversation with them. And then, hey, if that conversation goes well and I can truly understand what your pain points are, then maybe there's an opportunity for me to introduce you to my product. But really, I want to make sure that there's a fit, that what I'm seeing with all these other VPs of, sales, revenue, is that what you're seeing? Are you seeing these same things? Like, is that affecting you? Is it causing you anxiety as you're going into sales planning for next year? Like, are you spreading or doing spreadsheets, trying to do modeling that's taking so much time? Yes. Okay. And then I can introduce you to Varicent or whatever your product may be, but don't hard pitch. Don't do that and be like, oh, and by the way, this is what, my company does, and this is who we serve. And that's not a great first email. That's not laying the foundation. You want to be inquisitive. You want them to know that you're honestly just trying to learn more.
Yeah. Yeah, you're not really speaking the language of an executive when you lead with product.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, go ahead, Steven.
What the product does or any of those things to those points. It's just like, and that's why I say you go for that like early yes that you likely know they're experiencing or struggling with based on, your expertise, as LG said, that you are the SME, you are probably having more of those conversations about this particular topic than I am. Doesn't mean it's not top of mind for me. So come to me with that, and then let's figure out like if there's a fit.
So, Steven, I want to get your take on this piece. To kind of button up the hypothesis, there's a fear oftentimes from a rep that, well, if I'm trying to guess, essentially make a really educated guess on what the problem might be, I could get it wrong. Isn't that going to make me look like an idiot? And I'm curious from your perspective before I give my thoughts on that. Like if a rep really took the time to research and came in with a hypothesis of a challenge they think that you might be having, and they invited you to correct them, if they got it wrong, what would happen with you?
Yeah, for me, that's okay. You did a bunch of work, you brought some insight, and then it's just a simple like, oh, that's interesting, Jason. That's all the last three conversations I've had have been centered around that point. I'm curious then, what's number one or number two for you?
Yep.
And you just be quiet there. And then, 9 times out of 10, they're going to give you something. Might not necessarily be what you want to hear. But it at least allow you to know, and in sales, a quick no is just as good as a yes.
Yep.
Around like, should I keep hounding Steven on this thing, or should maybe I let him bake for 3 months or 6 months or whatever that timeline might be? But that is where, like, again, I think the natural reaction is like, oh, okay, well, thanks, we'll try back later. No, ask the next question, which is, and you sort of like, it's not putting that individual on the spot. It is sort of in some ways trying to make them feel like, oh man, Jason, you might be the outlier here. Like, that's interesting because all week, all month, all quarter, as the trends change, it seems like every conversation I've had with your peer set is centered around that. I'm curious then if that's not top of mind for you, what's your number one focus? Again, it might be something you can help with, might not be, but it's just a way better conversation.
Yeah. I always say it's easier to correct than to educate. So it's easier for someone to say, no, it's not quite that. There's more of a willingness. I think it's a lot of reciprocity, right? When you showed that you put in a lot of work and you tried, there's almost like a relief from the other person where they can just talk to you about it, versus like if someone just called you, Steven, and said, well, what's top of mind for you as an SVP of sales? You'd be like, come on, dude.
Yeah.
That's like the what's keeping you up at night question. It's like you need to lead with and share with something. There's give and take with this, and all of the stats. I mean, Chorus, he has a ton of great information on this, but especially in calls, the successful cold calls, the rep talks more as a percentage of talk time. You have to lead that conversation because you are the one calling them. You can't expect the prospect to lead a conversation when they didn't ask you to call them. So you got to bring in that insight. Let's talk. Oh, go ahead, LG.
Jason, I was just going to add something that sort of I've been thinking about recently that I want to start trying out. It just sort of ideated as we're having this conversation is, I downloaded, we're Clary customers, and I downloaded the Clary CRO playbook, which is really just a value packed piece of content. It's not hidden with, it is gated. So I put my email in, But it's not, just sort of clarity about the product, right? It's like, hey, here is a 13-week operating rhythm, operating cadence. Here are some key industry trends that we're seeing. Really valuable nuggets in there, right? And if I'm running the BDR team at Clary, someone reached out to me if I wasn't a customer and said, hey, here, here's what a lot of VPs of sales are talking about and thinking about. Curious if you're running into this. By the way, here is, a piece of content, a CRO playbook that I think you might get some value from, right? I think a lot of times in our outreach, we send like, hey, by the way, here's a case study where we helped a customer increase ROI by 10x. It's like, okay, again, it's about you and it's about your product. So something that I think I'm going to start testing, because it's something that I truly would appreciate as a buyer, is pieces of content that are not only are they not gated, but it's like, hey, I'm giving this to you, right? Because when we're reaching out and doing outbound, we are asking, right? We are asking. It's helpful to us. At least that's the way that it's perceived in most cases. And so I think it's a pattern interrupt. It's doing something unique and different by saying, hey, by the way, I just want to give you this ebook, this, something that is, again, just an industry trend that will actually be helpful to me in my job. Would love to get your thoughts on it. Right. And it can't be hidden with, here's everything you should know about our product. So that's a new approach that I'm going to start testing out. We'll let you all know how.
Yeah.
I love that approach. One of my biggest fears, and I want to ask Steven this, is like, if you do something like that, you create this great content. What is the best way to get someone, Steven, like you, to open an email? And by that, it's probably the subject line, right? I've gone back and forth so much on the subject, sometimes more than the body of the email, because I want them to be like, oh, this guy knows what he's talking about. And it's so hard to do in 6 words to be like, open me. What emails are you opening where you read a subject and you go, I got to open this. This resonates with me. Are they posing questions? What does that look like?
I think it mostly ties back to what Jason said earlier, where you're trying to get like the inner lingo of what myself and my colleagues and my direct peer set are talking about. And so, things like, look, it's the end of the year, which means a lot of companies are planning for 25 and they're going through budgeting, they're going through, tool evaluations, they're going through all of these different things, team structures. And so if it might be like, let's say you were a budget planning tool or you're planning for commissions, and it might be like, FY25 comp plan review, like might be something that is going to get my attention. And then so long as the body of the email references, hey, bunch of conversations I've had with SVPs, they're in planning stages for 25 comp plans. Was wondering if you're in the same boat. To Laura's point, here's an interesting study on where comp plans are going nowadays. And then you can sort of lead them to, right? I find a lot of people are spending a lot of time on page 4, and you've got all of the tracking, hopefully, whether it's a high spot or a seismic or any of those tools. And you can see, did they open the email? Did they click the link? What pages did they stop on? And then that informs the next email, the phone call, the LinkedIn message of, hey, you had a chance to check it out. What were your thoughts? Sort of go that way. But the subject line, I do want to try to get as close to what is top of mind, what they're thinking about, what they are talking about internally. The more I can make it look like an internal message, because those are the things I care about, the better off I'm going to be on getting open.
Do you find one that I've been testing out is the questions within the subject line, keeping it to 6 words or less. Hey, you got a $4 billion target. How are you going to get there? Sales planning, something like that. Are those thought provocative where you're like, hey, this resonates with me. I want to open this to understand what this guy's talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I do the question one or the internal one. I will, maybe I'm an outlier in some of these areas, but I do at least open it. And like I said in the chat, review the first line or 2 before I'm going to move on.
Yeah.
Okay.
That inner lingo, I love that. Like an inner lingo, Will Allred calls it internal camouflage. this is why it's so important to Groundswell. You're going to get stuff like if you're trying to reach out to Steven or Laura or whoever, you're going to get the stuff from them where you can ask, is there a project that you guys are working? Is there an initiative? Is there some sort of name for this initiative? Like that's your subject line right there, ideally. I'm going to give the audience a couple of ideas, especially if there's any sales leaders or enablement leaders here. We're talking about, Steven and LG are sales leaders, and a sales rep selling to a sales leader, it might be easier to get some of that context because you kind of know a little bit. Whereas if I'm selling to a marketing leader and I don't do marketing, it might be a little tougher to know what's top of mind internally for a marketing leader. Every company here that you guys work at probably has someone at that company that's an executive that's the same persona that the one you sell into. So if you sell into HR solutions, I know this sounds so simple, but if you as a sales leader or enablement leader haven't like hosted sessions and fireside chats with your internal persona that matches your buyer, like you're missing out on a huge opportunity. I mean, like you should be asking them all the same questions that you would want to know in discovery. I like having executives take screenshots of their emails and they could blur the ones out that people shouldn't see, but just so they can see the inbox. Like that's what I would love to see, Steven, of you is like, what does the inbox look like? What are people actually saying? And because if I don't know what people are doing, it's kind of hard for me to be different. The second idea too, one of my clients that sells into CISOs, they have 3 consultants on staff. One of them is an ex-CISO at Coca-Cola. Like you can hire consultants in these personas that can really validate a lot of the messaging and the hypotheses that you have, and you can get a really good firsthand perspective of that. Is there anything else that you guys have done in your careers or prior positions to like really educate yourself or the sellers on the personas and like what they really care about?
At my last company, we did a tremendous job of focusing on verticals and then personas within those verticals, because we were really able to hone in on one, what does the industry as a whole care about? And then how does that affect this person within that industry? And we saw tremendous open rates and response rates to that because I think it was just so tailored, and we had gathered so much information over a few years in our messaging used to tailor our messaging where it resonated with those people. Hey, if you're in med tech and you're a sales operations specialist, like you must be seeing A, B, and C. Is this accurate? Yes, I am. It's painful. It sucks. It's horrible. What do you do? So I think being hyper focused on personas and vertical and personas within verticals is a great route to go.
Industry specific stuff is so big. It really is. I mean, I even think of my line of work, 80% of my customers are SaaS, and there's that 20% that's like professional services that they don't know what sales enablement is oftentimes. That's not something that they have internally. They might have a trainer, for example, AE self-sourcing at a lot of those companies in this bucket, that's the thing that they always do. That's not an initiative. They don't have an SDR team, right? So like knowing internal stuff like that, especially related to the industry at the enterprise level, starting to verticalize the messaging a bit can be super powerful as well.
I'll just underscore, Jason, to your point. Like, I think, many of us maybe go through our standard onboarding and we might look at like a quick battle card of the personas we sell to, and then we're sort of off to the races, right? And so I would encourage everyone to ask themselves, like, am I very confident in the personas that I sell to, right? What do they care about? What are their career goals? What initiatives do they run? How are they measured? What does their day-to-day look like, et cetera, right? And can you speak that language? And if the answer is no, like that's okay, but you should, right, ask your leader, talk to your customers. Like that is, again, this is something that sounds very obvious, but it is oftentimes overlooked, or sometimes you just need a refresher, right? So that needs to happen before any of this, juiciness, that we're talking about today as it relates to crafting the messaging, because that's what's going to give you the confidence to hit the phones and have these conversations, to form the hypotheses, et cetera. I was just going to touch on really quickly. There's a great chat going on here around text messaging. So I think it'd be fun to share our different perspectives. So Kyle says, yes, texts are fair game. My perspective on texts is, there needs to be some sort of positive engagement with me.
Me too.
You
Yep.
text me cold, that is going to turn me away, and I'm going to push you away even further. But if
Can I interrupt you real quick? Can you tell me why that is? I'm curious, like, what is the visceral, like, emotional reaction that you have to that? Because I think it's similar for us.
it's, because texting feels personal, right?
Yeah.
You text your family, your friends, sometimes your colleagues, right? There's some sort of intrusiveness that comes along with that. If I do not know you and have not given you any sort of signal that I want to engage with you or communicate with you.
Yeah.
Now, if I said, "Hey, Jason, this sounds like an interesting initiative. It's not the right time, but like ping me in a month, ping me in 3 months." I would qualify that as positive engagement.
Yep.
And I would coach my team. There's something there, right? I've given you the green flag that like I want to talk to you. It's just not now. So when that month or 3 months rolls around, incorporate that text, right? So that's my take, is there needs to be some sort of positive engagement or conversation that happened at some point, versus just I have given you 0 responses at all and you just start texting me. That's not gonna fly with me.
Yeah.
I see here, Steven.
Yeah, no. I'm in your camp. Like the cold text out of the blue, no engagements, I'm not a fan of. As long as there's been, something, or I've tried all of the other mediums. So like, if I'm one of those individuals that I've called and I've left a voicemail, and I have the mobile number, I may shoot the text, just say, "Hey Laura, left you a voicemail. Know you're likely busy." And in some cases, text is an easier medium. So I'd drop you a note here. Let me know if that's okay. Right? Like if you're going to go cold, then I better have voicemail and email. And then you're sort of asking my permission on this might be an easier medium for you, given your schedule. Let me know if that's okay. But I do prefer texting once we've had some sorts of back and forth, a conversation or an open opportunity, or like I've sort of pointed you back to somebody else on my team. Hey, had a great conversation with blah, blah, blah. Let me know if it makes sense, when it makes sense to loop you back in, right? Like I want some sort of back and forth, but like a cold out of the blue with no other context, not a fan of.
What
No,
about
you didn't like all the texts from every single politician across the country the past few months?
I couldn't mark them as spam fast enough and like opt out fast enough. So
it's the worst.
But I think that's a good rule of thumb. Like if you don't like that happening to you, then maybe don't use that as a tactic to someone else. Because if it's not resonating with you, it's probably not going to resonate with them. I agree.
Yeah.
Cold text, probably not a great move. But once you've established a conversation, I think in this day and age, text is the easiest, fastest way to communicate with others.
Yep, absolutely. Let's end on this topic. Steven, you and I talked a little bit about this. The using executives for either intros into an account or kind of looping them into deals. We'll start with the first one. How do you guys think about that at ZoomInfo the network of the people that work at ZoomInfo has got to be insane. There's, especially at the enterprise level, there's probably people in ZoomInfo that are, at least some exec is connected in some sort of way to the executives at the accounts that you guys want to break into. How do you think about leveraging that as a way to kind of break in to the account? How do you guys think about that?
We do it a lot. So to your point, like either myself or my CRO or our CEO are on some Slack from a rep that says like, "Hey, do you know anybody at blah, blah, blah?" Or, "Hey, do you know so-and-so?"
Yeah.
And we will run that play. It's valuable because you have the connection. Our immediate note back though is like, what's the message? Why would we reach out? You've got to remember that like there is likely, if we say yes, there's likely some sort of relationship. And you need to put me in a position where I'm not going to burn my political capital, so to speak. Like I'm not going to burn the bridge with this individual. I'm not going to burn this relationship. So you have better done the homework. It better be a rock solid ask. I better have something to sort of like give back to this individual on why I'm reaching out and hoping they can make the connection. So we tend to use it more in funnel as opposed to top of funnel, like mid and later stages versus unless it's a super compelling offering, and I know again that they've been discussing this thing. So like Jays, if you were asking about LG and we were just had a conversation, I know that's really timely for her, then I would be comfortable making that recommendation. Say, hey, Laura, we talked about this like 2 weeks ago. Oddly enough, Jason just came across my desk. I wanted to make the connection in case it's helpful for you.
Yeah.
Again, as a seller, better be on your A game, because the last thing I want to do is recommend one of my people or recommend something and have you sort of botch it.
Well, on
What's
the
the,
top of funnel, I don't think, like as a salesperson, it doesn't mean it's a slam dunk. It doesn't
Yeah,
mean
yeah,
that they're
yeah.
gonna. So don't risk that and burning that relationship. Like be very tailored, empower them. But I would say, like you suggested, further down in the sales cycle is where that's really valuable. Just a cold introduction, probably not a good use of time or resources.
so you said give. What is the give when you think about, like, let's say one of your reps loops you in mid stage and they're like, hey, can you thread with this or meet with their SVP of sales? What is the give for you? How do you think about how you're adding value for that SVP?
Yeah, a lot of times it is like I want to give you an executive level connection. So
Yeah.
if there is something that you're not always going to ask like the AE for, the account executive or whatever. I also like, hey, if I can be a resource, like just to talk shop about what I'm working on in our
Yeah.
business, or what I'm talking to others about, I'm happy to do so. So those are more often not my sort of
Yeah.
engagements when sellers come to me and ask, is to say, hey, wanted to make sure you had, exec to exec communication. These partnerships usually don't happen without that. So here's my line. And if I can be a resource, whether it's what I'm seeing in my business, what others are seeing, feel free to shoot me a call.
Got it. So it's that idea of if I'm selling HR or security or whatever, it's like if we can connect those similar parties, there's the talking shop element of, yeah, why wouldn't I want to know what one of my successful peers is
Yeah.
doing? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, go ahead, LG.
Yeah, I agree with Steven. We don't leverage our CE team in as it relates to top of funnel. With our very top sort of focus, we have a focus 15, which are sort of like our top accounts for each rep, right? Those lists are obviously circulated across marketing, cross functionally, along with our C-suite, and of course we'll broker intros, but that's just pretty rare. I think we leverage executive intros within our sales cycles, specifically with our C-suite, probably more frequently than the average company. And I actually believe that most sales teams do this too late, right? A lot of times in a sales cycle, you get to the end of the cycle and, maybe you're stuck in the deal. Oh, let's bring in our CFO or a CRO. Let's bring someone in when you're stuck, right? And at that point, sometimes it can be too late. So what we often do is we bring them in early, right? Because we know that in some cases we're competing against companies that are much larger than us. And so for us to bring in a C-suite executive early in the process to kick off the demo with a 5 to 10 minute overview, right? Just to sort of wrap their arms around the company to say, hey, we're not too big for you, right? Every customer matters. And now when we get stuck 6 months down the line, they've already met and built that relationship or can put the face to the name with one of our C-suites, right? So it's a huge strategic advantage to bring in your executives early. In fact, Kyle has a demo with a very large mortgage company next week. We found out that they're bringing their CFO in on the first demo, which is pretty rare for our sales cycles. We're bringing in a C-suite executive, right? So that we can mirror and match. So definitely a lot of sellers don't feel that you have to close the deal alone. Don't feel that you have to wait until the end. It is a strategic advantage to bring in senior folks early. You got to make sure that the right people, like you can't just bring in the CEO or CRO just because they have the title. Like they right? If you have a technical audience, they need to be technical, right? You got to ensure that they sort of display well in that environment. Yeah, so
I couldn't agree more. Like, I get it as a seller, you know, like, oh, now like there's all eyes on this opportunity. And, you know, you get like, I'm not ready to commit the deal. You get all of those objections from a seller. Like, I don't want to bring in the C-level. But when you do it too late, it's far worse. Like, I can't be a deal savior and just like show up and then like I'm in this weird place where this executive wants all these things. You don't want me to offer a discount or whatever, but I have no other cards to play because we have no relationship. So yeah, get them in early and like get over the fear of deal inspection and all of those things. It's just going to help.
Empower them. You need to prep them. Don't just have the CEO to be there as the CEO. Make sure that they understand everything that's gone on in the deal. They understand the politics. They understand the drivers. And that's going to be much more impactful. Last thing I'll say is one thing we didn't talk about, video messaging. I've been doing a lot of video messaging through LinkedIn once I'm connected with someone. That way they know that it's you. You're not an AI bot. It's more personalized. I would highly suggest for the callers on this webinar to try video messaging on LinkedIn, make it a little bit more personalized, keep it to 45 seconds and send those out. And you're going to get some great responses.
Love it. Good work, team. This is super fun. It looks just from the chat, people got a ton of value from this. So thank you everyone for the participation, showing up, chatting with us, all that kind of stuff. And Steven, LG, Kyle, thanks for spending time with us. Go check out ZoomInfo. Go check out Varicent. Go check out Orem. Connect with these three. You know, cold call Steven, leave voicemails, all that kind of stuff. But use ZoomInfo. Make sure to use ZoomInfo to get the number. Don't be using any of those other solutions to get the number. All right. Cool. Thanks, you guys. This is super fun. We'll see you. Have a good one.